My darling Jenny, I still hear the surf mixed with screams, waves carrying boys who never made it past the tide. The sound doesn't leave me, not in the quiet moments, not when I close my eyes, not even now as I sit here in this shell crater with my hands still shaking and the taste of salt and blood in my mouth. The ocean keeps washing up on that beach like it's trying to clean away what happened there, but some stains go too deep for even the sea to reach. I'm writing this with fingers that won't stop trembling, my rifle, Jenny, the one I named after you, propped against the sand beside me, still warm from firing, still carrying the weight of what I had to do to make it off that beach alive. I don't know if this letter will reach you, sweetheart. I don't know if the censors will black out half of what I'm trying to say, or if they'll just burn it entirely because it's too honest, too raw, too much truth for folks back home to handle. But I need to write it anyway. I need to tell you what happened today, June 6, 1944, the day they're probably already calling D-Day in the papers, the day that's supposed to be the beginning of the end of this war, but felt more like the end of everything I used to believe about courage and heroism and what it means to be a man. The water was red, Jenny. Not pink, not rust-colored, but red. Bright, arterial red mixed with the gray-green of the channel and the white foam of the waves. Boys were dying before they even touched French soil, cut down by machine gun fire while they were still waist-deep in the surf, their bodies rolling with the tide like driftwood. I saw things today that I'll never be able to unsee, heard sounds that will follow me for the rest of my life, however long or short that might be, and I'm trying to find the words to explain it to you, even though I know there aren't words big enough or true enough to capture what hell looks like when it's wearing the face of a French beach on a gray morning in June. But I'm getting ahead of myself. You always told me I did that, jumped to the end of the story before telling the beginning, got so caught up in where I was going that I forgot to explain where I'd been. So let me start here, with the important part, the only part that really matters. I'm alive. Tommy R. isn't, Hank L. isn't, David P. isn't. But I am, somehow, by some miracle, or accident, or cruel joke of fate, I'm still breathing, still thinking, still able to hold a pencil and write your name at the top of this letter, even though better men than me are feeding the crabs on Omaha Beach. If this story moves you, subscribe to the channel and leave a comment if you had a family member or friend who lived through the Second World War. Every story shared helps keep their memory alive. Because Tommy and Hank and David, they deserve more than just a cross in a military cemetery and a telegram to their mothers. They deserve to be remembered as the men they were, not just the soldiers they died as. My name is Samuel H., a private first class in the United States Army, Company C, 2nd Battalion, 1st Infantry Division. The big red one, they call us. Though right now I don't feel big or proud or like I belong to anything, except this hole in the ground where I'm hiding from the German artillery that's still pounding the beach behind me. I'm 22 years old, though I feel about 100 right now. Every muscle in my body aching, every nerve ending raw and exposed. My mind spinning through memories of what happened in the last 6 hours like a nightmare I can't wake up from. Before all this, before the war and the killing and the dying and the terrible understanding that we're all just meat and chance and luck running out, I was a railway worker's apprentice in a small farming town in Iowa. You remember, Jenny? Of course you remember. You were there for all of it. For every part of the life I had before the Army took me and turned me into whatever I am now. We grew up together in that town, went to the same school, sat in the same church pews on Sunday mornings while Reverend Thompson droned on about sin and salvation, and I tried not to stare at the way the light came through the stained glass windows and caught in your hair. I remember the hill behind your father's barn, the one where we used to go in the evenings after I'd finished my shift at the rail yard and you'd finished helping your mother with the chickens in the garden. We'd climb up there and sit on the old fence, the one with the boards worn smooth from generations of kids doing exactly what we were doing, and we'd watch the trains go by on the tracks below. The sun would be setting behind us, painting the rails gold, and the trains would rumble past carrying freight and passengers to places we'd only read about in books, Chicago, New York, maybe even California if they were going far enough. You always smelled like summer up there on that hill, Jenny. Like fresh-cut grass and the soap your mother made from lye and lavender, and sometimes like the lemonade you'd bring in a mason jar, always too sweet because you knew I liked it that way. The wind would mess up your hair and you'd laugh, that sound that made everything in the world feel right and possible and good. I'd sit there with my hand on the rough wood of the fence, splinters catching in my calluses from the railway work, and I'd think about how lucky I was. How impossibly, unreasonably lucky to have you sitting beside me, to have a future spread out ahead of us as clear and straight as those railroad tracks below. I remember the taste of that lemonade, sugar and lemons and something that tasted like home, like safety, like everything the war has taken from me. I remember the sound of your voice when you'd talk about the house we'd have someday, the garden you'd plant, the children who'd run through those same fields we were sitting above. I remember thinking that nothing bad could ever happen as long as I had you, as long as I had that hill and those trains and the promise of a future that seemed as solid and real as the ground beneath my feet. I enlisted the day after Pearl Harbor. You remember that too, I know, because you cried when I told you, sitting on that same fence, watching the winter sun set behind the barn. Sammy, you said, using that nickname only you and my mother ever used. Sammy, please don't go. Let someone else fight. Stay here with me. But I couldn't, Jenny. I couldn't keep loading freight onto railway cars while the world was burning, while boys like me were shipping out to fight and die, and I sat safe in Iowa pretending the war wasn't my problem. I'll come back, I promised you. I'll come back and we'll get married and have that house and that garden and those kids just like we planned. You gave me a note that day, folded it into my hand, and told me to read it when I was scared or lonely or needed to remember why I was fighting. I've read it every night since I left, Jenny. Every single night. The paper's worn soft now, the edges torn from being folded and unfolded so many times, the ink smeared from when I got caught in the rain during training in England. But I can still read it. I've memorized every word. They trained us in England for months, drilling us on how to storm a beach, how to move under fire, how to kill efficiently and survive if we were lucky. Sergeant Miller, our squad leader, was a veteran of North Africa, a hard man with eyes that had seen too much and a voice like gravel. "Listen up, boys," he'd say during our briefings, standing in front of maps that showed beaches and cliffs and obstacles that looked impossible to overcome. "Nobody's brave when the water's red and your friends are dying around you. But we're going anyway. We're going because someone has to, and because if we don't, this war goes on forever and none of us ever see home again." I thought I understood what he meant. I thought I was ready. I thought the training had prepared me for what combat would be like, for the noise and the fear and the chaos. I was wrong about all of that. You can't train for what I saw today. You can't prepare for the moment when the ramp drops and hell opens up in front of you, and you realize that everything you thought you knew about courage and duty and sacrifice was just words, just empty sounds people make to convince young men to walk into slaughter. We boarded the ships on June 5th, loading onto transports that would carry us across the English Channel to France, to Normandy, to beaches that had code names instead of real names, because code names don't carry the weight of history, don't make you think about all the people who died there before or all the people who would die there soon. Our beach was called Omaha. Just Omaha, like a city in Nebraska, like a place you'd stop for gas on a road trip, not like a place that would turn into a graveyard before noon. The channel crossing was rough, the ships pitching and rolling in heavy seas, most of the boys seasick and miserable, hanging over the rails or hunched in corners trying not to vomit on their boots. I wasn't sick. Growing up in Iowa, I'd never been on a boat before in my life, but somehow my stomach handled the motion better than most. I stood on the deck in the darkness, watching the wake of the ship spread out behind us in white foam, thinking about you, Jenny, thinking about that hill and those trains, and the promise I'd made to come home. Tommy R. found me there on the deck, this kid from Cincinnati who looked about 17 even though he swore he was 19. Tommy was the youngest in the company, always talking about the garage his father owned back home, how he was going to work there after the war, how he'd learn to fix cars and maybe even buy the place someday when his old man retired. "You scared, Sam?" he asked me, his voice barely carrying over the sound of the engines and the sea. Yeah, I told him, because there was no point in lying. Me too, he said. We stood there together in the dark, two scared kids pretending to be soldiers, watching England disappear behind us and France creep closer with every minute that passed. Hank L. was playing cards below deck, dealing hands of poker with matches for stakes since we weren't allowed to gamble with real money. Hank was from Scranton, Pennsylvania, a joker who could find humor in anything, who'd kept us laughing through the worst parts of training with his terrible impressions of officers and his stories about the girl back home who'd promised to wait for him. Sam, he called out when he saw me come down from the deck, you better get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. He grinned when he said it, like we were going on a camping trip instead of an amphibious assault on a defended beach. I tried to smile back but couldn't quite manage it. David P. was on his knees beside his bunk, praying. David was from Topeka, Kansas, deeply religious, always carrying a wooden cross his mother had given him when he shipped out. He prayed every night, sometimes silently, sometimes whispering words I couldn't quite hear, but that sounded like pleading, like bargaining with God for just one more day, one more chance, one more breath. Praying for all of us, David? I asked. He looked up at me, his face serious and young and already resigned to whatever was coming. Always, he said. Someone has to. I tried to sleep, but couldn't. Lay in my bunk listening to the sounds of the ship, engines thrumming, water rushing past the hull, men snoring or crying or praying in the darkness. I pulled out your note, Jenny, unfolded it carefully and read it by the dim light of a lantern someone had left burning. My darling Sammy, it said in your careful handwriting. I know you're scared. I know you're far from home and facing things I can't imagine. But I want you to know that I'm with you, always, in every moment. When you're afraid, remember that hill behind the barn. Remember the trains and the sunset and the promise we made to each other. Come home to me. Come home and we'll build that life we dreamed about. I love you more than words can say. Forever yours, Jenny. I folded the note back up, tucked it into my breast pocket right over my heart, and closed my eyes. But I didn't see darkness. I saw that hill, saw you sitting beside me with the wind in your hair and the sun setting behind the rails. Saw the future we were supposed to have spreading out ahead of us like a map of possibilities. And I prayed, not the way David did, with words and ritual and faith that God was listening, but in my own way, silently, desperately, that I'd live long enough to see that future, to sit on that fence with you again, to taste your too sweet lemonade and hear you laugh and believe that the world could still be good. We woke before dawn, the ship already slowing as it approached the French coast. They fed us breakfast, coffee and eggs and toast that I couldn't eat because my stomach was knotted with fear and anticipation. Sergeant Miller gathered us together in the hold, his face grim in the dim light. This is it, boys, he said. Everything we've trained for comes down to the next few hours. The beach is going to be hot. Germans are dug in on the bluffs with machine guns and artillery, and they've had 4 years to prepare for us. Some of you won't make it off that beach. That's just the truth, and I'm not going to lie to you and say otherwise. But the ones who do make it, the ones who get across that sand and up those bluffs, you're going to be part of something bigger than any of us. You're going to be the ones who started the liberation of Europe. He paused, looking at each of us in turn, and I could see in his eyes that he knew, that he'd already calculated which of us were likely to die and which might have a chance. When that ramp drops, he continued, you move. You don't stop, you don't hesitate, you just move forward no matter what's happening around you. If the man next to you falls, you keep going. If you get hit, you get up if you can, and you keep going. The only way off that beach is forward, through whatever hell they're going to throw at us. Do you understand? We nodded, mumbled affirmatives, tried to look brave and ready when really we were just terrified children playing at being soldiers. They issued us extra ammunition, grenades, told us to waterproof everything we could because we'd be going into chest-deep water, might even have to swim if the boats couldn't get close enough to shore. I checked my rifle, my Garand, the one I'd named Jenny because having your name on it, made me feel like you were protecting me, like a piece of you was there with me even though you were 3,000 miles away, safe in Iowa. The metal was cold and heavy in my hands, familiar after months of training but still strange. Still this tool of death that I was supposed to use to kill men I'd never met. Men who probably had girlfriends and mothers and futures they wanted to live for, just like I did. At 05:30 hours, they loaded us into the landing craft, Higgins boats they called them, flat-bottomed vessels that could carry 30 men and get close enough to shore to drop a ramp and let us charge out into the surf. The sea was still rough, waves slamming against the sides of the boat, spray soaking us before we'd even left the transport ship. I was packed in tight with the rest of the squad, all of us standing shoulder to shoulder, trying to keep our balance as the boat rocked and pitched. The smell was overwhelming: diesel fuel, salt water, vomit from the guys who were already sick again, and underneath it all the sharp scent of fear sweat, the kind that comes from knowing you might die in the next hour and being powerless to stop it. The run to shore took forever and no time at all. 30 minutes of bouncing through heavy seas, the boat slamming into waves, water sloshing over the sides, all of us soaked and cold, and trying not to think about what was coming. I could hear the naval bombardment, battleships and cruisers pounding the German positions on the bluffs, the sound like continuous thunder rolling across the water. "That'll soften them up," someone said behind me, trying to sound confident. "By the time we get there, the Germans won't know what hit them." But I could hear the doubt in his voice, could feel it in my own gut. The bombardment was supposed to destroy the German defenses, but I had a sick feeling it wouldn't be enough, that we were sailing into something the Navy couldn't fix with shells and explosives. As we got closer to shore, the German artillery started up, shells exploding in the water around us, geysers of white foam erupting where they hit. I could hear machine gun fire now too, the distinctive rattle of German MG-42s, firing so fast they sounded like chainsaws tearing through wood. Traces arced across the gray morning sky, bright lines of death searching for targets. A landing craft to our left took a direct hit, exploded in a ball of orange flame and black smoke, and I watched men flying through the air, bodies tumbling into the water and disappearing beneath the waves. 30 seconds, the coxswain yelled from the back of the boat. 29, 28. I checked my rifle again, made sure the safety was off. Tried to remember everything they'd taught us in training. Keep low, move fast, find cover, return fire. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the weapon. 20, 19, 18. I thought about you, Jenny. About that hill and those trains and the promise I'd made. 15, 14, 13. Tommy R. was beside me, his face white as chalk, his lips moving in what might have been prayer, or might have been just him talking to himself, trying to stay calm. 10, 9, 8. "Remember!" Sergeant Miller shouted over the roar of the engine and the explosions. "Keep moving. Don't stop for anything. 5, 4, 3. The boat hit something, a sandbar maybe, or one of the obstacles the Germans had planted in the surf, and lurched to a stop. 2, 1. The ramp dropped. Hell opened up in front of us like a door swinging wide, and on the other side was noise and fire and death in forms I'd never imagined. The machine guns on the bluffs opened up immediately, bullets hitting the ramp, ricocheting off metal, punching through men before they'd even taken a step forward. The soldier in front of me, I didn't even know his name, just saw the big red 1 patch on his shoulder, same as mine, jerked backward as rounds hit him in the chest, his body tumbling into the water that was already waist-deep and churning with bullets. "Go! Go! Go!" Sergeant Miller was screaming, and we went, jumping over the side of the ramp into the surf, into the chaos, into what felt like the end of the world. The water was cold, shockingly cold after the warmth of the cramped landing craft, and it was deep, up to my chest, and I was weighted down with 60 pounds of equipment and my rifle, and I could barely keep my head above water as I pushed forward toward the beach that looked impossibly far away. The noise was indescribable, Jenny. I know I'm trying to describe it, trying to put words to what I heard, but words aren't enough. It was a wall of sound, Machine guns hammering, rifles cracking, artillery shells exploding, men screaming, the ocean roaring as shells hit the water and sent up geysers that crashed back down on us. There was a high-pitched whine in my ears from being so close to explosions, and underneath everything else was this wet, tearing sound that I realized was bullets hitting human bodies, hitting the men around me who were dying in the surf before they'd even seen the beach. I waded forward, stumbling over obstacles hidden beneath the water, trying to keep my rifle dry even though I was soaked through and freezing and convinced I was going to die before I made it to shore. A bullet hit the water inches from my face, spraying salt water into my eyes, and I ducked instinctively even though there was nowhere to duck to, nowhere to hide, just open water and open beach and German machine guns sweeping back and forth methodically, clinically, mowing us down like wheat. Tommy R. was ahead of me, almost to the beach, his feet touching sand, and he turned back to look at me, his mouth opening to shout something, maybe encouragement, maybe instructions, maybe just my name, and then his chest exploded. I saw the bullets hit him, saw the blood spray out in a bright red mist, saw his expression change from determination to surprise to nothing at all as he fell backward into the surf. I was close enough to grab him, to pull his head above water, and his eyes were open and looking at me but not seeing anything, not anymore. Tommy! I was screaming his name even though I knew he was dead, knew it the instant I saw his eyes. But I couldn't accept it. Couldn't process that this kid who'd been talking about his father's garage just hours ago was gone. His lips moved, blood bubbling out, and I heard him whisper, "Tell Mama the sun's pretty." Or maybe I just imagined it. Maybe that's what I wanted to hear instead of the gurgling death rattle that was really coming from his throat. Then the tide pulled him away from me, pulled his body back out into the deeper water, and I lost my grip on him, and he was gone, floating face down in the red foam that surrounded the beach. I made it to the sand, not really sand, more like gravel mixed with larger stones that rolled under my boots and made running impossible. I threw myself behind one of the obstacles, a twisted piece of steel that the Germans had planted to stop tanks, and I lay there gasping and shaking while bullets screamed overhead and men died all around me. The beach was chaos, complete and total chaos. Bodies were everywhere, floating in the surf, sprawled on the stones, piled up behind obstacles where they'd tried to find cover and failed. The water was red, exactly like I said at the beginning of this letter. Bright arterial red mixing with the gray-green of the channel, and the tide kept bringing more bodies in, kept washing them up onto the shore like the sea was trying to give them back to the land they died trying to reach. I looked to my right and saw Hank L., maybe 20 yards away, crouched behind another obstacle, firing his rifle at the bluffs. He saw me looking and gave me a thumbs up, that stupid grin on his face even though we were in hell, even though half the company was already dead or dying. "Sam," he yelled, "we gotta move, can't stay here." He was right. The tide was coming in, the obstacles would be underwater soon, and we'd be exposed with no cover at all. But moving meant crossing 30 yards of open beach under fire from machine guns that hadn't stopped since the first ramp dropped, hadn't even slowed down, just kept hammering away at us with that terrible mechanical efficiency. I gathered myself, took a breath that tasted like cordite and salt and death, and I ran. Just stood up and ran toward Hank's position, sprinting across those 30 yards with my head down and my body tensed waiting for the bullet that would end me. Bullets kicked up stones around my feet, whined past my head so close I could feel the air move, and then I was diving behind Hank's obstacle, landing hard on my shoulder, gasping for breath. "Thought you weren't gonna make it," Hank shouted, still grinning even though his hands were shaking and his face was spattered with someone else's blood. "Where's Tommy?" I shook my head, couldn't speak, couldn't tell him that Tommy was floating somewhere in the red surf with a hole in his chest and his last words still echoing in my head. Hank's grin faded. He understood. "Jesus," he whispered. "Jesus Christ." We stayed there for maybe 5 minutes, catching our breath, trying to figure out what to do next. The beach was still being swept with machine gun fire, Mortars were landing randomly, sending up columns of stones and sand and sometimes pieces of men. I could see other soldiers scattered behind obstacles all along the beach, pinned down just like us, unable to advance, unable to retreat, just stuck in this killing zone, hoping that reinforcements or naval fire or divine intervention would save us. That's when I saw David P. He was further up the beach, closer to the seawall, and he was dragging another soldier. I couldn't see who, just saw the limp body and David struggling through the stones with his wooden cross bouncing on his chest. A mortar shell landed nearby, not a direct hit but close enough that shrapnel scythed through the air. David jerked, stumbled, dropped the soldier he'd been dragging, but he didn't fall. He looked down at himself, at the blood spreading across his uniform, and then he looked back at the soldier on the ground. He knelt beside him, checking for a pulse, and I saw him smile, actually smile, as he found one. "He's gonna make it home," David shouted to no one in particular, his voice carrying across the chaos. "I know it." And then he collapsed, just folded over sideways onto the stones, his cross falling from his neck and landing beside him in the blood-soaked gravel. I screamed his name, "David! David!" until my throat was raw. But he didn't move again, didn't respond, just lay there, with that smile still on his face, like he'd accomplished something important, like saving one man was worth the cost of his own life. "We gotta move," Hank said again, his voice tight with grief and fear and determination. "We gotta get off this beach, or we're all gonna end up like David." He was right. Staying here meant dying. The only way forward was forward, across the beach to the seawall, then up the bluffs to the German positions. It seemed impossible. It seemed like suicide. But it was the only option. Sergeant Miller appeared from somewhere to our left, his face a mask of blood and dirt, his eyes wild. "On me!" he roared. "Everyone on me! We're going up!" And somehow, against all logic and survival instinct, we went. Stood up and followed him, a ragged group of maybe 15 men who'd survived the landing, running across that beach under fire, stepping over bodies, slipping in blood, waiting for the bullet or shell that would end us. I was in the middle of the group, Jenny, running with my rifle in my hands and your note pressed against my heart, and I wasn't thinking anymore. Wasn't feeling, was just moving forward, because moving forward was what Sergeant Miller had told us to do, and because stopping meant dying. And dying meant I'd never see you again, never keep my promise, never sit on that fence and watch the trains go by while you laughed beside me. We made it to the seawall, a low concrete barrier that gave us some cover from the machine gun fire, but not from the mortars that were still falling. I pressed myself against the wall, chest heaving, legs shaking so badly I wasn't sure they'd hold me up. Out of the 15 men who'd started the run with Miller, only 9 made it to the wall. The rest were scattered across the beach behind us, adding to the pile of bodies that was growing with every minute that passed. "We're going up," Miller said, pointing to a break in the bluffs where a trail switchbacked up toward the German positions. "Those bunkers up there are what's killing everyone on the beach. We take them out, we give the next waves a chance." It was insane. There were 9 of us, and God knows how many Germans up in those bunkers and pillboxes, protected by concrete and sandbags and 4 years of preparation. But Miller was right. If we didn't take out those positions, the landings would fail, the invasion would fail, and all the men who'd already died on this beach would have died for nothing. We started up the bluff, climbing through loose dirt and scrub grass, bullets kicking up dust around us. Hank was behind me, breathing hard, still making jokes even though his voice was shaking. "Hey, Sam," he gasped. "Remind me never to volunteer for anything ever again." I wanted to laugh, wanted to tell him that I'd remind him every day for the rest of our lives. But before I could respond, a German machine gun opened up from a pillbox at the top of the bluff, and Hank's helmet rang like a bell, and he fell backward, tumbling down the slope past me. I turned, reaching for him, and I saw the bullet hole in his helmet. Not through it, thank God. Just a crease along the side that had knocked him unconscious but not killed him. "Hank!" I was scrambling down toward him when Miller grabbed my shoulder. "Leave him! He's alive! He'll wake up! We gotta keep moving!" And I did. God help me. I left Hank lying there on that slope, and I kept climbing because Miller said to, and because stopping would mean dying, and dying would mean breaking my promise to you. But then we got to the top of the bluff, to the edge of the German positions, and another machine gun opened up, and this time Hank wasn't lucky. This time the bullets found him where he lay unconscious on the slope, and I heard the wet thump of impacts, and I knew without looking that my friend, the joker from Scranton who'd kept us laughing through everything, was dead. I didn't look back. Couldn't look back. Just kept moving forward with Miller and the 7 others who were still alive. The German bunker was concrete and steel, a low structure with firing slits for the machine guns, surrounded by barbed wire and mines. We couldn't go through the front. That was suicide. So we went around, crawling through the scrub on our bellies, moving slowly despite every instinct screaming at us to hurry, to run, to get this over with. Miller threw a grenade through a firing slit on the side of the bunker, the explosion muffled by the concrete, and then we were rushing the entrance, rifles up, fingers on triggers. I was third through the door, behind Miller and another soldier whose name I never learned. The inside of the bunker was dark and full of smoke from the grenade, and there were bodies on the ground, 2 German soldiers torn apart by the blast, their blood painting the walls. But there was one more, a young kid maybe my age, standing at the MG-42 with his hands still on the gun, his eyes wide with shock and fear. He looked at me. I looked at him. In that frozen second, I saw that he wasn't a monster, wasn't some evil Nazi from the propaganda posters. He was just a kid, just a soldier following orders, just someone who probably had a girl back home in Hamburg or Berlin or wherever he was from. A girl who wrote him letters and waited for him the way you were waiting for me. He had sandy blonde hair and freckles across his nose, and his uniform was too big for him, like he'd lost weight or never really fit into it in the first place. My rifle was already up, already aimed at his chest, and my finger was on the trigger. He opened his mouth to say something, maybe to surrender, maybe to plead, maybe just to scream, and I shot him 3 times. The Garand kicked against my shoulder, the sound deafening in the enclosed space, and I watched him fall, watched the light go out of his eyes the same way it had gone out of Tommy's eyes in the surf, and I felt nothing. Just a hollow emptiness, where I thought I should feel guilt or horror, or at least something human. The echo of the shots faded, and there was just silence in the bunker, except for the ringing in my ears, and Miller breathing hard beside me. "Good work, Sam," he said, but I barely heard him. I was staring at the German kid's body, at the blood spreading across his uniform, at his empty eyes staring at nothing. And I was thinking, he had someone waiting for him too. He had a girl or a mother or a wife, someone who's going to get a letter just like the one you might have gotten if I'd died on that beach, a letter that starts with, "We regret to inform you." We cleared the bunker, made it safe, and then we moved to the next position and the next. And somewhere in that process I stopped thinking about the Germans as people and started thinking about them as targets, as things that had to be eliminated so I could stay alive, so I could make it home to you. I don't know how many men I killed today, Jenny. I stopped counting after the first one. But each one of them had a face, had eyes that went from life to nothing in the space between heartbeats. And I'm the one who made that transition happen, who pulled the trigger that erased them from the world. By midday, the beach was secure, or as secure as it was going to be. The landings continued, wave after wave of men pouring onto Omaha now that we'd cleared some of the German positions on the bluffs. Engineers were blowing paths through the obstacles, medics were working on the wounded, Graves registration was starting the grim task of collecting the dead. I sat in that bunker, the one where I'd killed the German kid, and I tried to process what had happened, tried to make sense of the past 6 hours. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I held them up in front of my face and watched them tremble, watched the fingers that had pulled the trigger again and again twitch and spasm like they had a will of their own. My uniform was soaked through, salt water and sweat and blood, some of it mine from small cuts and scrapes I didn't remember getting, most of it from other people, from Tommy and David and men whose names I never knew. The smell was in my nose, in my mouth, coating the back of my throat, cordite and blood and the ocean, and something else, something organic and terrible that I realized was the smell of death, of bodies lying in the sun, starting to decay. I pulled out your note, Jenny, the one you gave me back in Iowa. It was soaked, the paper pulpy and falling apart, the ink smeared until the words were almost illegible. But I could still read it, could still make out, "My darling Sammy," and "Come home to me," and "Forever yours." I held it carefully, trying not to tear it further, and I read those words over and over like a prayer or a mantra or a promise that I was desperately trying to keep. A medic came by, a young kid with the Red Cross on his helmet, checking on the survivors. "You hit?" he asked me, his voice professionally calm despite the chaos and carnage around us. I shook my head. "Not physically," I wanted to say, but didn't. "How do you explain that you're bleeding from wounds that don't show, that something inside you broke on that beach, and you don't know if it can be fixed?" "I'm fine," I told him, and he nodded and moved on to check the next man, someone who had visible injuries that could be treated with bandages and morphine. Sergeant Miller found me an hour later. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past 6 hours, his face haggard, his eyes hollow. "We did it, Sam," he said, sitting down beside me on the concrete floor of the bunker. "We took the beach. Cost us damn near everything, but we took it." I wanted to ask him if it was worth it, if taking this stretch of French coastline was worth Tommy and David and Hank and the hundreds of other boys who died in the surf or on the sand or on the bluffs. But I didn't ask because I already knew what he'd say, that it had to be worth it, that we couldn't afford to think otherwise, that the only way to honor the dead was to keep fighting until the war was won. "How many did we lose?" I asked instead. Miller shook his head. "Don't know exact numbers yet. Maybe half the company, maybe more." Half the company. 60 men, maybe 70, dead in a single morning. Men who'd eaten breakfast with me, who'd joked and prayed and puked over the side of the landing craft, now reduced to bodies on a beach, names on a casualty list, telegrams that would arrive at houses in Cincinnati and Scranton and Topeka with the words, "We regret to inform you." "You did good today," Miller said, putting a hand on my shoulder. "Kept your head, followed orders, took out that gun position. You saved lives, Sam. Remember that. Whatever else you're feeling right now, remember that you saved lives." I nodded, wanted to believe him, wanted to think that my actions today had been heroic or noble, or at least necessary. But all I could think about was that German kid with the freckles, his eyes going empty, his blood spreading across the bunker floor. I'd saved American lives by taking German lives, but did that make me a hero or just a killer who happened to be on the winning side? Night fell on Omaha Beach, and with it came a strange quiet. The guns had mostly stopped, just occasional bursts of fire in the distance where pockets of resistance were still being cleared. The tide had gone out, exposing the full scale of the carnage, bodies and equipment scattered across hundreds of yards of beach, landing craft still burning in the surf, the sand stained dark with blood that the ocean hadn't been able to wash away. I walked down to the water's edge, needed to move, needed to do something other than sit in that bunker and think about what I'd done and seen. The bodies were still there, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, some already covered with tarps or ponchos, others still lying where they'd fallen. I recognized some of them. Boys from my company, boys I'd trained with in England, boys who'd been alive this morning and were now just meat in memory. I found Tommy R. He'd washed up on the shore, his body rolling gently with the waves. Someone had closed his eyes, at least, so he looked almost peaceful if you ignored the massive wound in his chest and the pale, waxy color of his skin. I knelt beside him in the wet sand, and I cried, "Jenny!" Just broke down and cried like I hadn't cried since I was a child. Tears streaming down my face, my whole body shaking with sobs that came from somewhere deep inside where I'd been holding everything in, holding all the fear and horror and grief that I couldn't process while I was fighting to stay alive. "I'm sorry," I whispered to Tommy, even though he couldn't hear me, even though he was gone and would never hear anything again. "I'm sorry I couldn't save you. I'm sorry you never made it back to your father's garage. I'm sorry for everything." The words felt inadequate, felt like nothing against the weight of his death, but I said them anyway because what else could I do? I pulled out your note again, what was left of it, and I tried to read it, but the words were too smeared, too waterlogged to make out. It didn't matter. I had it memorized anyway. "Come home to me," you'd written. And I was trying, Jenny. I was trying so hard to stay alive, to get through this war and back to that hill in Iowa where we used to watch the trains go by. But I didn't know if the person who came home would be the same person who left. I didn't know if that boy, the one who thought war was about heroism and duty, who believed in clear lines between good and evil, I didn't know if he still existed or if he died on this beach along with Tommy and David and Hank and all the rest. I thought about what Sergeant Miller had said before we boarded the landing craft, about how nobody's brave when the water's red and your friends are dying around you, but we go anyway because someone has to. I understood now what he meant. Courage isn't about being fearless or strong or confident. Courage is being absolutely terrified, knowing you're probably going to die, understanding that the next few hours are going to be hell on earth, and going anyway because the alternative, letting someone else do it, letting the war continue, letting the people back home stay in danger, is worse than dying. But understanding that doesn't make it easier. Understanding that doesn't bring back the dead or erase the images burned into my brain or stop the shaking in my hands. I'm changed, Jenny. Something fundamental inside me is different now, broken or hardened or just gone, and I don't know if it'll ever come back. The boy who left Iowa, the one who worked at the rail yard and drank your too sweet lemonade and made promises about our future, he's not the one writing this letter. Someone else is writing it. Someone older and colder and more damaged. Someone who's seen what human beings are capable of doing to each other and can never unsee it. There's a weight to killing that I never understood before today. The training prepares you for the mechanics of it, how to aim, how to squeeze the trigger, how to reload quickly and efficiently. But they can't prepare you for what it feels like to watch a man's life end because of your actions, to see the light go out of someone's eyes and know that you're responsible, that his mother will cry for him, and his girl will mourn him, and it's because you pulled a trigger. That German kid haunts me, Jenny. I close my eyes and I see his face, see his freckles and his too big uniform and the surprise in his eyes when the bullets hit him. He was probably conscripted, probably didn't want to be there any more than I wanted to be on that beach. Maybe he had a farm in Bavaria, or worked in a factory in the Ruhr, or studied at a university before the war. Maybe he had dreams about what he'd do after the war was over, about the life he'd build, about the person he'd become. And I ended all of that. I erased his future with 3 pulls of a trigger, and I'll carry that with me for the rest of my life, however long or short that might be. But I also know that if I hadn't killed him, he would have kept firing that MG-42, would have kept mowing down American soldiers on the beach below, would have killed men who had mothers and girls and futures too. Maybe he would have killed me. So I can't regret it, can't wish I'd done differently. Because doing differently might have meant dying myself or watching more of my friends die. But I also can't feel good about it, can't take pride in it, can't think of myself as a hero for having done it. I'm just a survivor. Just someone who made terrible choices in a terrible situation and happened to live through it when so many others didn't. I wonder how much of my humanity I lost today. How many more times will I have to pull that trigger before there's nothing left of the person I used to be? War doesn't just kill bodies, Jenny. It kills souls too, slowly, piece by piece, until you're not sure if you're still the person you were, or if you've become something else entirely, something you don't recognize and don't particularly like, but can't escape, because it's what you needed to become to survive. I think about David P., kneeling beside that wounded soldier, smiling as he died because he'd saved someone. That's the kind of death that means something, that has purpose and dignity and sacrifice in the best sense of the word. But most death here isn't like that. Most death is random and meaningless and stupid, bullets and shells finding targets by chance, killing men who were in the wrong place at the wrong moment, erasing lives for no reason except that war is chaos and chaos doesn't discriminate. Tommy died because flak hit him instead of missing by 3 feet. Hank died because he fell unconscious and couldn't get up before the next burst of machine gun fire found him. David died saving someone, yes, but he also died because he was unlucky, because shrapnel happened to find him instead of finding someone else. There's no justice in it, no fairness, no cosmic balance that ensures good men survive and bad men die. There's just chance and luck and the terrible randomness of violence. It's been 12 hours since the ramp dropped, Jenny. 12 hours since I stepped into hell and somehow came out the other side. I'm sitting in a foxhole now, dug into the French earth maybe half a mile inland from Omaha Beach, writing this letter by the light of a shielded candle while the rest of the squad sleeps or tries to sleep around me. Tomorrow we push further inland, toward the hedgerows and villages, and whatever fresh horrors the war has waiting for us. But tonight, for just this moment, I'm alive, and I'm thinking about you, and I'm trying to hold on to the promise I made. Your note is ruined, the paper falling apart, the words illegible. But I don't need to read it anymore because I've memorized every word, every loop of your handwriting, every emotion you poured into those lines. Come home to me, you wrote, and I will, Jenny. I swear to you I will. I'll survive this war somehow. I'll make it through the fighting and the dying and the slow erosion of everything I used to be. And I'll come home to you, and we'll build that life we talked about on the hill behind your father's barn. I don't know who I'll be when I come home. I don't know if you'll recognize me, if you'll still love the man I've become, if I'll be capable of being the husband you deserve after everything I've seen and done. I'm carrying weight now that I'll never be able to put down, the faces of the men I've killed, the deaths of friends I couldn't save, the memories of this beach and this day that will never fade, no matter how many years pass. I'm broken in ways I don't fully understand yet, damaged by 6 hours of horror that have probably marked me for life. But I'm still yours. Still your Sammy. Still the boy who drank your lemonade and watched trains and promised you a future. That part of me is still here, buried deep under all the trauma and fear and guilt, but still here, still fighting to survive, still holding on to the hope that there's something beyond this war worth living for. You're that something, Jenny. You're the reason I got off that beach alive. You're the reason I kept moving forward when every instinct told me to freeze or hide or give up. The thought of you waiting for me, of that hill and those trains and the life we're going to have, that's what kept me going. I want you to know that if I don't make it home, if the next letter you get is from the War Department with that terrible phrase, "We regret to inform you," I want you to know that I loved you with every breath I took, that you were the last thing I thought about before I died, that the promise I made to you was real and true and the most important thing in my life. Find someone else, Jenny. Don't wait forever for a ghost. Find someone good and kind who'll give you the life you deserve, the house and the garden and the children, and be happy. That's what I'd want for you. That's what I'm fighting for. Not just to win the war, but to make sure people like you get to live in a world where you can be happy and safe and free. But I'm not dead yet. I'm still here, still breathing, still holding my rifle, my Jenny, and still trying to survive one more day, one more mission, one more battle until this war is finally over and I can come home. So don't give up on me yet. Don't mourn me before I'm gone. Keep writing those letters. Keep waiting on that hill. Keep believing that someday I'll step off a train in Iowa and you'll be there to meet me, and we'll finally get to start that future we've been planning. I'm sorry this letter is so dark, so full of death and horror and things you shouldn't have to read. I wanted to protect you from all of this, wanted to write cheerful letters about the sights in England, or the food we ate, or the friends I'd made. Letters that would make you smile instead of cry. But I can't lie to you, Jenny. I can't pretend this is anything other than what it is. Hell on earth, humanity at its worst, a meat grinder that's destroying boys by the thousands and calling it victory. You deserve the truth, however ugly it is. You deserve to know what I'm going through, what I'm becoming, what I'll be when I come home. The candle is burning low and my hand is cramping from writing, and the sky to the east is starting to lighten with the first hint of dawn. Soon the war will start again. Artillery barrages, small arms fire, the slow grinding advance inland against German resistance that shows no sign of breaking. I'll put this letter away, pick up my rifle, and do what I have to do to survive another day. But before I do, I want to say one more time, I love you. I love you more than I can express, more than words can capture, more than life itself. You're my North Star, my anchor, my reason for living. Wait for me. Believe in me. And know that every breath I take, every step I make, every battle I survive brings me one day closer to seeing you again. Still hear the sea, Jenny. It sounds like it's crying with us. With all my love, Sammy PFC, Samuel H., U.S. Army, somewhere in Normandy. June 6, 1944. I'm carrying your note still, what's left of it, pressed over my heart where it's always been. The paper's destroyed, but the words are permanent, burned into my memory where no amount of war can erase them. When I'm scared, and I'm scared all the time now, I think about those words, about you, about home. That's what gets me through. Not courage or duty or patriotism, but the simple selfish desire to see you again, to kiss you again, to hold you and never let go. That's worth surviving for. That's worth fighting for. You are. Samuel survived D-Day and the brutal push through Normandy. He fought all the way to St. Lo before shrapnel from a German artillery shell tore through his side, sending him back to England and eventually home to Iowa. The wound healed, leaving a jagged scar he'd carry for the rest of his life. But other wounds, the ones you couldn't see, the ones that lived in nightmares and sudden panic at loud noises and the way he'd sometimes stare at nothing for hours, those never fully healed. The M1 Garand he'd named Jenny made it home with him, somehow surviving the bureaucracy that usually confiscated weapons. He kept it in the basement, wrapped in oilcloth, never showing it to his children or grandchildren, never speaking about what he'd done with it on a French beach in June of 1944. The rifle stayed hidden, a silent witness to things Samuel couldn't talk about even 60 years later. Jenny received the letter 2 months after D-Day, the pages stained with salt water and blood and sand from Omaha Beach. She read it sitting on that hill behind her father's barn, the same hill where they'd watched trains and planned their future, and she cried. For Tommy R. and Hank L. and David P. For all the boys who never came home, but mostly for Samuel, for the pain in every word he'd written, for the weight he was carrying that she couldn't help him bear. They married in the spring of 1946, a small ceremony in the same church where they'd sat as children. Samuel was thin, haunted, prone to nightmares that made him wake screaming about water turning red and friends calling his name. But Jenny held him through those nights, whispered the same words she'd written in that ruined note. I'm here, you're home, you're safe. And slowly, over years and decades, helped him find his way back to something like peace. He never spoke about D-Day to anyone except her, and even then only in fragments, pieces of memory that would surface at unexpected moments. The sound of surf making him freeze, the smell of the ocean on summer vacations making him pale and quiet. June 6ths passing every year marked by silence and distance and a visit to the cemetery, where he'd stand alone among the headstones of men he'd never met, but somehow knew. The weight of that day, of Tommy's last words about the sun being pretty, of David's smile as he died saving someone, of Hank's jokes ending in silence, stayed with Samuel until his final breath. On his deathbed in 2004, at the age of 82, Samuel's last words were to Jenny, who sat holding his hand the way she'd held it for 58 years of marriage. I made it home, he whispered, like I promised. I made it home to you." And then he closed his eyes for the last time, finally free of the nightmares, finally released from the beach that had haunted him for 6 decades. The note Jenny had written, or what was left of it, a few fragments of paper with illegible ink stains, was buried with him, placed over his heart where he'd carried it on D-Day and every day since. At the funeral, his grandson asked Jenny what the paper was. She smiled through her tears and said, "A promise." One he kept. The sacrifice made on Omaha Beach liberated Europe and changed the course of human history. Military historians speak of D-Day as the longest day, as a triumph of courage and planning and determination. They cite casualty figures, over 2,400 American dead on Omaha Beach alone, as acceptable losses in pursuit of strategic victory. But for Samuel, it was never about strategy or victory or the grand sweep of history. It was about surviving minute by minute, about watching friends die and somehow staying alive, about carrying impossible weight and trying not to break under it. One man's fight on a beach in Normandy sounds heroic when you read about it in history books. But to Samuel, it was simply survival. Hours bought with the blood of brothers, a future purchased at the cost of innocence and peace of mind, and the ability to ever again feel completely safe in the world. He never called himself a hero. When pressed, he'd say only, "I did what I had to do, and I lived when better men didn't. That's all." If this letter moved you, if Samuel's fight on Omaha Beach and the sacrifice of Tommy and Hank and David deserve to be remembered, subscribe to this channel and leave your like. Every subscription helps us preserve voices like theirs, voices that must never fade into silence. There are thousands more stories untold, men like Tommy R., and who dreamed of working in his father's garage and died before he could touch French soil. Like Hank L., whose jokes kept men laughing until a bullet ended them forever. Like David P., who died smiling because he'd saved one life, believing that was enough. Your support keeps their memory alive. Your subscription ensures the next generation understands the cost of the freedom they inherited. Subscribe, leave your like, share this story. And if you had a veteran in your family, a grandfather, uncle, or neighbor who served on D-Day, write their name in the comments. Let's honor them together. These men stormed a beach knowing they'd probably die, carrying nothing but rifles and fear, and the desperate hope that their sacrifice would mean something. We owe them more than silence. We owe them memory, not the sanitized version that talks only of glory and heroism, but the real truth, that they were terrified boys who did impossible things, who survived horrors we can barely imagine, who came home broken and spent the rest of their lives trying to piece themselves back together. Samuel H., Tommy R., Hank L., David P. Their names deserve to be spoken. Their stories deserve to be heard. Their sacrifice, not just their deaths, but the cost they paid for surviving, deserves to be honored with understanding, with empathy, with the recognition that war destroys everyone it touches, victors and vanquished alike. Their voices, our mission, over and out.